Hello there. As a journalist and broadcaster, I generally tend not to overly dwell on individual stories, unless they're really huge stories that impact many, many people, such as the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which, as many people know, is about so much more than a missing child, sadly. And also stories involving abuse within the British establishment. I will keep on at those sort of stories. But generally, I tend to cover an injustice or an alleged injustice and then move on to the next one, simply because this world is full of so many injustices. However, this is one story that I refuse to let go of, simply because the continued silence around it is deeply alarming to me and smells beyond fishy. I'm talking, of course, about Dan Wootton. Dan Wootton being a tabloid hack born in New Zealand, but mostly plied his trade as a journalist and broadcaster in the UK for a number of organisations, including the Daily Mail Group, The Sun, ITV, GB News, etc. Now, we are talking about a continuation of alarming allegations that are still streaming out, courtesy of Byline Times. We are now 9 articles in, and what we have so far is the Daily Mail have paused Dan Wootton's column, subject to investigation. The Sun, his former employer, is investigating him. But GB News, who currently employ him, have doubled down. They've said that this is an attack at the hands of dark forces within the British establishment, which for anybody with a brain and who has not been subject to a frontal lobotomy knows is hilarious, because you are not going to get much more establishment than GB News unless we're talking about BBC News. It's establishment. The ruling party, the government ruling party, have people who work at GB News and go throughout that building. So it is absolutely an establishment. The people behind it who are funding it, they are establishment people. Okay, so, but my problem here is that this week we've had more revelations regarding Dan Wootton. We've heard how reality show people say he approached them to model for him, including the request to model nude. Now, we are talking about young males. Among those alleged to have been targeted over an 8-year period between 2011 and 2019, during which time he worked at The Sun, ITV, Mail. The young men who were targeted about this modelling included The Only Way is Essex star Kirk Norcross, Big Brother contestant JJ Bird, and an X Factor singer who was apparently just out of his teens. Clearly, this was an abuse of power. This man was working as an influential celebrity journalist and broadcaster and approaching these men separately about nude modelling. This is most peculiar, and still no word from GB News. And it concerns me greatly, because the general protocol of these things is when people are subject to such allegations, and extensive allegations like Dan Wootton is, the current employer should absolutely suspend them pending an investigation, still on full pay because he's not guilty of anything at this stage, but he should be suspended, and for a number of reasons. And that includes a duty of care to the guests who are on GB News or the other staff at GB News. Where is the duty of care towards them? And let us not forget, while these allegations continue to come out, Dan Wootton is there using his platform in a way that is arguably highly abusive and continue to be so. Because if you've doubled down on such allegations, you're actually encouraging people to turn their ire on those who are asking questions, which is problematic. That is potentially victim blaming and victim shaming. So why have GB News not only doubled down by saying this is an attack on us at the hands of the establishment, but have kept Dan Wootton on? Is it because GB News has its own share of very serious controversies that they have sought to hide. First of all, GB News has only been going for 2 years. Okay, so what Byline News have reported this week is that they settled an employment claim for a 5-figure sum in which sexual harassment was alleged against the chief executive of GB News. That is Angelos Frangopoulos. He is the chief executive of GB News, who is also subject to very serious allegations. Some of the stuff is absolutely gruesome and shows the alleged toxicity at the place. So in the 2 years that GB News has been going, it would appear they have made a number of payouts and non-disclosure agreements, e.g. gagging orders. There are said to be 2 separate workplace incidents involving other GB News executives. A woman was said to go on sick leave after allegedly being told that she was so ugly, she should put a bag on her head and that she should open her legs to win a promotion. Rather than taking legal action, she's said to have left the job quietly and in disgust. And GB News, they maintain, we don't have a toxic workplace culture. The company enjoys a good relationship with current and former employees. Really? The claim named the chief executive, a married father of 5, and made allegations that he had propositioned and declared his feelings for a female who worked at GB News in a late night phone call after work drinks in 2021. Apparently, she then rebuffed him, and it was alleged that Mr. Frangopoulos undermined and marginalised the woman in her role before she left and got employment lawyers involved to negotiate a settlement with the channel. A source said she felt ostracized, bullied, and became psychologically distressed, essentially for turning down someone's advances. That's a direct quote. It is understood that GB News has never received a formal internal complaint regarding this issue. However, GB News did defend the employment tribunal claim, and after a preliminary hearing, it was withdrawn and a financial settlement reached. Now, oftentimes when a financial settlement is reached, it's because parties involved do not want it to go onto court and into the wider public arena. So there is that issue, which makes it look as if GB News absolutely has things to hide. Then there was a second payout that took place in 2022, and this involved allegations of racial discrimination, which breached the Equality Act, according to insiders. The journalist had complained about being exposed to several thousand racist emails from some of the viewers. I don't know about you, but there is definitely a very serious racist undertone regarding GB News. This week, Lawrence Fox, one of its presenters, actually did blackface and included his 2 children in that while they're on holiday. So there are problems over at GB News regarding race. Of that, I have no doubt whatsoever. And apparently the woman involved got absolutely no support from the company. One insider told Byline Times that the context of some of these emails was really, really shocking, included the N-word repeatedly. It was just really horrible stuff. And actually, rather than GB News then issuing a warning about people contacting them, you know, saying, for example, if you include racism, any form of bigotry, sexism, discrimination, we will consider reporting you to the police. Rather than do that, they got the woman to delete the emails. Fabulous. Talk about deleting evidence, eh? So GB News go on and on about how there are dark forces trying to take them down, but the reality would appear that they're doing a damn good job themselves. So that still doesn't fully answer why Dan Wootton is still on air, bringing in such low life as Kelvin McKenzie. Kelvin McKenzie, a former editor of The Sun, front page lies, and yet can't seem to detect the scandal that's right under his very nose and right in front of him. You have to wonder how many news people are compromised in the alleged Dan Wootton sting. Look, I think it's really clear, right? Very, very clear. Most people don't care about GB News. There's a small left-wing army online who are intent on going after them, and it's horrible. It's all about censorship, and I don't approve of that. I don't want to close down GB News. I want them to do their due diligence. They have a man who is fronting a weekday show who has been subject to such serious allegations, and all they're doing is putting their fingers in their ears, their head in the sand, doubling down. This is unacceptable behavior. I think most decent people would agree that whether you like Dan Wootton or not, you should be able to see the hypocrisy of the station and the presenters. And that is, they went after this morning's Philip Schofield for involving allegations far less serious than what Dan Wootton has been alleged to have done. They equally went after BBC presenter Hugh Edwards, again involving allegations far less serious than Dan Wootton. And it's totally unacceptable. And I am reminded of this article, I'm going to quote from it, that Dan Wootton wrote for GB News. The headline, "The Philip Schofield affair is the biggest scandal to hit ITV in a generation, and Miss McCall's ongoing silence no longer holds," says Dan Wootton. And Miss McCall being the chief executive of ITV, who was actually eventually called to answer in Parliament about another situation, but it ended up also involving this. And I find extraordinary that Dan Wootton and GB News were insisting on investigations regarding this situation, quite rightly, and yet seem to be impervious of these continuing articles. We know they're not. We know they are absolutely aware of them. How could you not be? And this particular quote in the Dan Wootton article is so hilarious. And that is, "This is the biggest scandal to hit ITV in a generation, and Miss McCall's ongoing silence no longer holds. The same, Mr. Wootton, can be said about GB News." Perhaps the reality is that GB News as a station is just far too compromised to investigate any member of staff who is accused of heinous allegations. It is evident to me and others that the hypocrisy emanating from GB News is highly problematic. They go after other presenters and journalists, which they rightfully should do, and remain absolutely silent about the allegations in their midst. Is it the case that GB News are only interested in pointing outwards, and when people want to look inwards at what's going on with them, there's always another Harry and Meghan story to refocus your energy and attention on? And yes, I will keep on at this story until I see some semblance of balance and it looking less like a cover-up. This absolutely appears to be a right royal cover-up on behalf of the British establishment and their lackeys, such as Dan Wootton.